April 25, 1915, Gallipoli Peninsula. Allied forces storm the beaches, intent on seizing the Ottoman capital. Amid exploding shells and chaos, a young Ottoman lieutenant colonel stands firm on the ridge. Mustafa Kemal rallies his exhausted troops and famously declares, "I am not ordering you to fight, I am ordering you to die." His defiant resolve halts the invasion and turns him into a national hero overnight. This moment on the cliffs of Gallipoli is a turning point. It thrusts Mustafa Kemal onto the world stage as a bold leader, setting the stage for his transformation into Ataturk, the father of modern Turkey. Mustafa Kemal Atatürk's story begins humbly. He was born in 1881 in Salonika, Thessaloniki, a thriving port city of the late Ottoman Empire. His father, Ali Rıza, hung his sword over baby Mustafa's cradle, a symbolic dedication of his son to military service. Ali Rıza insisted the boy attend a modern secular school, steering him away from the traditional religious education favored by Mustafa's devout mother, Zübeyde. This early exposure to contemporary education planted the seeds of modern thinking in young Mustafa. However, tragedy struck when Ali Rıza died when Mustafa was just 7 years old. The loss of his father at such a young age was a painful blow, but it also steeled Mustafa's character. He was a serious, determined child, keenly aware of his father's wish for him to serve his nation. After her husband's death, Zübeyde moved with Mustafa to a rural farm for a time. Concerned that her son might grow up without proper schooling, she eventually sent him back to Salonika for education. There, Mustafa became fascinated by the smartly dressed cadets from a local military school. He dreamed of wearing a uniform himself. Against his mother's wishes, she had hoped he would choose a safe bureaucratic career. Mustafa boldly took the entrance exam for the military secondary school. He was accepted, beginning a lifelong military journey. In the military school, a mathematics teacher was so impressed with Mustafa's intellect that he gave him the nickname Kemal, meaning the perfect one. From then on, he was known as Mustafa Kemal. The young cadet excelled in his studies, graduating in the top of his class and moving on to the Ottoman War Academy in Istanbul in 1899. Growing up in the waning days of a once mighty empire, Mustafa Kemal absorbed lessons both in the classroom and from the streets of a changing world. He was ambitious, disciplined, and driven by a vision even as a youth. As a newly minted army officer in the early 1900s, Mustafa Kemal entered an Ottoman military rife with reformist fervor and political intrigue. He initially sympathized with the Young Turk movement that sought to modernize the empire, and he briefly joined a secret society of reformist officers called Vatan ve Hürriyet, Fatherland and Freedom, to oppose the Sultan's autocratic rule. However, Mustafa Kemal soon grew wary of mixing politics and the military. When the 1908 Young Turk Revolution restored the constitutional government, its hero was Enver Pasha, a rival officer who would become Kemal's lifelong nemesis. Unlike Enver and the ruling Committee of Union and Progress, CUP, Mustafa Kemal believed the army should stay out of politics and focus on professionalism. He urged his fellow officers to abandon political ambitions and serve the nation as soldiers first. This principled stance earned him the respect of many colleagues, but alienated the CUP's leaders. As a result, the ambitious young officer was shunted to remote assignments, away from the central power structure. Yet these experiences only broadened his horizons. He spent time in Damascus and Libya, where he saw combat during the Italo-Turkish War of 1911-12, helping defend Ottoman Tripoli, modern Libya, against Italian invasion. He fell ill with malaria and an eye condition on the front, requiring treatment in Vienna, but his dedication never wavered. He also served in the volatile Balkans, and when the Balkan Wars erupted in 1912, Mustafa Kemal played a role in defending the Gallipoli area and organizing retreating forces. Amid these trials, he demonstrated personal courage, tactical skill, and an unwavering resolve that would define his leadership in the years ahead. World War I catapulted Mustafa Kemal from a capable officer to a legendary commander. When the Ottoman Empire entered the war on the side of Germany, Mustafa Kemal was eager to lead troops in battle. Initially, Enver Pasha kept him sidelined in a minor post, but by 1915 Kemal finally received command of the 19th Division stationed at Gallipoli. There, on the shores of Gallipoli, he seized his moment of destiny. As Allied British, French, and Anzac forces landed, Mustafa Kemal moved his division decisively to plug gaps on the front line. His foresight and sheer determination blunted the enemy advance. In brutal fighting, Kemal famously told his men that they were not to retreat, but to fight to the death, and they obeyed. He himself narrowly escaped death when a piece of shrapnel struck a pocket watch he kept over his heart, sparing him from injury. The hard-fought Battle of Gallipoli ended in disaster for the Allies and made Mustafa Kemal a household name. He was hailed as the savior of Istanbul, the capital he had protected, and was promoted to the rank of colonel in June 1915. This victory was an enormous morale boost for the beleaguered Ottoman nation. After Gallipoli, Mustafa Kemal served in the Eastern Front against the Russian Empire. In 1916, at age 35, he was promoted to general, Pasha, after winning victories against the Russians. Notably, he became the only Ottoman general that World War I to defeat Russian forces in battle. By now, his reputation as a brilliant field commander was firmly established. He met another rising officer, İsmet İnönü, during these campaigns, forging a friendship with the man who would later be his closest ally in building the Turkish Republic. In 1917, Mustafa Kemal was posted to the Middle Eastern Front, Syria-Palestine, but he grew disgusted with the deteriorating state of the Ottoman army, which was poorly led and undersupplied. He resigned his field command in protest after clashing with German advisors and Ottoman high command. By the war's end in late 1918, the once formidable Ottoman Empire was on the brink of collapse. Constantinople, Istanbul, fell under Allied occupation, and the Sultan's government was prepared to accept a humiliating peace. Mustafa Kemal returned to Istanbul after the Armistice of Mudros, October 30, 1918, to a scene of despair. Foreign troops patrolled the streets, and the empire he loved was being carved up. But even in defeat, Mustafa Kemal's resolve only hardened. The flame of patriotism burned in him, and he quietly began planning how to save his nation from extinction. With World War I over and the Ottoman state in ruins, Mustafa Kemal would now undertake his most historic mission, the liberation and rebirth of Turkey. He began by defying the very authorities he once served. On May 19, 1919, a date now immortalized in Turkey, the 38-year-old Kemal arrived on the Black Sea coast at Samsun, officially as an inspector of Ottoman forces. In reality, he was there to ignite the fire of resistance. "Our country's independence is in danger," he warned. Disgusted by the Sultan's subservience to the Allies, Mustafa Kemal resigned from the Ottoman army in July 1919 and renounced his loyalty to the Istanbul government. At that moment, he became a rebel in the eyes of the empire and a savior to Anatolian Turks longing for freedom. He began rallying colleagues and former comrades, declaring that the Turkish nation must take its fate into its own hands. In June 1919, Kemal issued the Amasya Circular, a bold manifesto proclaiming that the nation's independence was paramount and that a national resistance movement must form. Across Anatolia, locals who feared partition and foreign rule took heart. Small resistance groups and militia banded together under Kemal's call. To give direction to this spontaneous uprising, Mustafa Kemal organized two landmark congresses of Turkish revolutionaries. In Erzurum, July 1919, and Sivas, September 1919, he met with representatives from various regions, forging unity out of chaos. These congresses affirmed the goal of full independence and refused to accept the brutal terms of occupation. They adopted the National Pact, Misak-ı Milli, a set of territorial and political goals for a free Turkey. Crucially, Mustafa Kemal emerged as the clear leader of the nationalist cause. He was appointed head of the movement's executive committee. The aging Ottoman Sultanate, meanwhile, acquiesced to Allied demands and, in August 1920, signed the Treaty of Sèvres, which sought to partition Turkey among the Allies, Greeks, Armenians, and others. This treacherous treaty would have meant the death of Turkish independence. Mustafa Kemal flatly rejected it. Instead, he helped establish a new Grand National Assembly, GNA, in Ankara on April 23, 1920, effectively a rival government to the Sultan. This bold step amounted to open revolution. The Ankara government elected Mustafa Kemal as its president and commander-in-chief. In response, the Ottoman regime in Istanbul condemned him to death for treason, a sentence Kemal met with defiant laughter knowing that Istanbul's decrees were now meaningless in the nationalist-held interior. The Turkish War of Independence had begun. Under Mustafa Kemal's leadership, the nationalist forces, the Kuvayi Milli, fought on multiple fronts between 1919 and 1922. In the east, they faced Armenian forces. In the south, French and local armies. But the fiercest battles raged in western Anatolia against invading Greek armies that had occupied Izmir and marched inland. At first, the struggle was desperate. The Greeks advanced deep into Anatolia by 1921, even threatening Ankara. But Mustafa Kemal rebuilt the Turkish military virtually from scratch, instilling discipline and hope. He secured crucial aid from the new Soviet Russia, gold and weapons, playing international politics shrewdly to buy time and resources. Kemal also displayed strategic brilliance on the battlefield. In August to September 1921, at the critical battle of the Sakarya River, he personally took command of the outnumbered Turkish forces. Over 22 grueling days, they halted and repelled the Greek offensive just 80 kilometers from Ankara. This victory was a turning point. The Greek tide was broken for good. In gratitude, the Grand National Assembly granted Mustafa Kemal the title of Ghazi, meaning victorious warrior of Islam, and the rank of Field Marshal, honors for his extraordinary leadership. Mustafa Kemal urged his people to be patient and steadfast. There is no line of defense, only a surface of defense, and that surface is the whole country, he declared, signaling that every inch of land would be fought for. True to his word, he prepared a decisive counter-offensive. On August 26, 1922, Mustafa Kemal launched the Great Offensive, Büyük Taarruz. Leading from the front, he orchestrated a lightning campaign that smashed the Greek lines at Dumlupınar. In a matter of days, Turkish forces swept westward in a victorious advance. By September 9, 1922, they liberated the coastal city of Izmir, Smyrna, where the war had begun 3 years before. As Greek troops and remaining Allied forces evacuated, Turkish independence was all but secured. Mustafa Kemal's triumphant army had saved the Turkish heartland from partition. In victory, however, Kemal showed restraint. He did not allow revenge killings or chaos. When some urged a march on the Allied-occupied city of Istanbul, he prudently refrained, avoiding a clash with great powers. Instead, he focused on diplomacy. The nationalist victory forced the Allies to negotiate. At the Conference of Lausanne in Switzerland, Turkey, represented by İsmet İnönü, stood firm on full sovereignty. The resulting Treaty of Lausanne, July 24, 1923, recognized the Republic of Turkey as an independent nation within its present borders. The capitulations and harsh terms of earlier treaties were abolished. It was a diplomatic triumph that confirmed on paper what had been won on the battlefield. Just months later, on October 29, 1923, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk proclaimed the Republic of Turkey, with Ankara as its new capital. The decades of sultans and sultanate were over. The Ottoman dynasty was formally abolished. The last sultan had already fled into exile in November 1922. Mustafa Kemal was unanimously elected the new republic's first president, a position he would hold until his death. As joyous crowds celebrated in the streets and mosques offered prayers for the nation, cannons boomed in salute. A people, once downtrodden and on the brink of oblivion, had reclaimed their destiny. Mustafa Kemal, now widely known as Gazi Pasha, was hailed as a George Washington of Turkey, the founding hero of the nation. Yet for Ataturk, the revolution was only half complete. The next challenge was perhaps even greater: to transform this war-torn, largely traditional society into a modern, secular, and progressive state. Having won the war, President Ataturk now set out to win the peace by utterly reshaping Turkish society. "We have achieved our political independence," he said in essence. "Now we must modernize the country from top to bottom." Over the 15 years of his presidency, 1923-1938, Ataturk launched an ambitious program of reforms so sweeping that they are collectively known as Ataturk's reforms, a revolution by law and culture rather than by bloodshed. Ataturk's governing style was determined and often autocratic, but also visionary. He was a man in a hurry, determined to thrust Turkey forward by decades in just a few years. He and his close collaborators, like İsmet İnönü, believed that drastic changes were needed to secure Turkey's future among the civilized, advanced nations. One of Ataturk's first targets was the centuries-old entanglement of mosque and state. In 1924, the new government abolished the Islamic Caliphate, a bold move ending the Ottoman Sultan's remaining religious authority over the Muslim world. The Sharia courts and religious schools were dismantled, and a secular civil code was adopted, based in part on European legal models, to govern marriage, family, and property matters. Islam would continue to be the faith of most Turks, but it was removed from governance and public policy. In 1925, Ataturk also outlawed the traditional dervish Sufi orders and their lodges after a reactionary revolt in the Kurdish region, making it clear that the new Turkey would not tolerate political opposition in religious guise. These steps dealt a tremendous blow to the power of conservative clergy and religious institutions in daily life, completing a process of secularization begun in late Ottoman times. Under Ataturk's leadership, Turkey declared itself a secular republic, and this principle of laiklik, secularism, became a pillar of the state. Ataturk's reforms touched every aspect of life, amounting to a social and cultural revolution. In 1928, he personally championed the replacement of the old Ottoman Arabic script with a new Turkish alphabet using Latin letters. Overnight, the written language of the nation changed, a bold step to improve literacy and align Turkey with the West. Ataturk himself traveled village to village with a blackboard, teaching the new alphabet to ordinary people. Education was made free, compulsory, and secular. The aim was to create an informed citizenry for a modern nation. The calendar was westernized. The Gregorian calendar replaced the Islamic calendar, and Sunday replaced Friday as the weekly day of rest. Even the way Turks dressed was revolutionized. Ataturk regarded the fez, the brimless cap that was a symbol of the Ottoman era, as a sign of backwardness. In 1925, he banned the fez and urged men to wear modern hats with brims. He himself donned a Panama hat in public to set an example. Similarly, he discouraged traditional clothing like the veil for women. Under Ataturk, Turkish women gained unprecedented rights. Women were granted the right to vote and to hold elected office well before many European nations did so. Ataturk saw women's emancipation as essential. He often said, "Society is like a bird with two wings, men and women. If one wing is broken, the bird cannot fly." He encouraged women to shed outdated customs, get educated, and enter professions. By the 1930s, Turkish women were voting and even serving in parliament, a dramatic change in a patriarchal society. In addition to social reforms, Ataturk pushed economic and technical progress. He believed in statism, a form of state-guided development, building industries, railways, and infrastructure to catch up with the industrialized world. While mainly remembered for cultural changes, he also oversaw the founding of new factories, banks, and universities. Under his watch, thousands of new schools were built, and literacy rates slowly climbed, though still low by 1938. Ataturk also nurtured a new sense of national identity and pride. He promoted a narrative that the Turks had a proud ancient heritage and a vibrant future, instilling confidence in a people long disparaged as the sick man of Europe. In 1934, as a capstone to his nation-building, the parliament passed a law mandating surnames for all citizens. Ottomans traditionally had none. It was then that Mustafa Kemal was granted the unique surname Ataturk, which means Father of the Turks. By law, no one else can ever use this surname. It was an apt title for the man who had effectively reborn the Turkish nation. All these reforms were part of a coherent vision known as Kemalism, which became Turkey's official state ideology. Ataturk's 6 fundamental principles of Kemalism were enshrined in the constitution: republicanism, nationalism, populism, statism, secularism, and revolutionism. In simple terms, these meant a republic governed by the people, not a monarchy, a proud Turkish national unity, above ethnic or religious divisions, equality and civic participation for all citizens, a mixed economy with state intervention for development, a strict separation of religion from government, and a commitment to continuous innovation and reform in society. Ataturk firmly believed Turkey had to catch up with the contemporary civilization and even surpass it, and that meant no tradition was too sacred to reform. He was unyielding in this mission, Some of these changes, especially secularism and attire reform, shocked segments of the population. There was resistance, small uprisings, and even an assassination attempt, but Ataturk's government suppressed them decisively. He maintained a one-party rule. His party, the Republican People's Party, was effectively the state, to ensure stability and prevent old forces from undermining his revolution. Democracy, in Ataturk's view, would come gradually, but first the people had to be educated in modern values. His rule was authoritative and paternalistic, but in his mind, necessary to secure Turkey's future. One foreign journalist observing Turkey in the 1930s remarked that Ataturk governed with the patience of a schoolmaster and the firmness of a general. By the mid-1930s, the face of Turkey had changed beyond recognition. A visitor who left in 1918 and returned 20 years later would find a secular republic with Western laws, Western clothes, and a new language on the street signs. Turks had adopted last names. Women walked unveiled and attended universities. The call to prayer was even briefly chanted in Turkish instead of Arabic. The transformation was not just cosmetic. It fundamentally altered Turks' daily lives and outlook. Not every reform fully took root in Ataturk's lifetime. Deep rural poverty and illiteracy persisted, and devout communities still privately kept old traditions. But the trajectory was set. Ataturk had pulled his nation into the 20th century. As he famously said, "Medeniyet yolunda ilerlemek duraksamak yoktur." On the path to civilization, there is no stopping. Behind the public figure of Ataturk, the stern, uniformed soldier with piercing blue eyes, there was a complex, in many ways, private man. Mustafa Kemal was married only once. In early 1923, in the midst of leading the independence war, he wed Latif Uşaklıgil, an educated and strong-willed woman from Izmir. Latif symbolized the modern Turkish women Ataturk wanted to encourage. She was fluent in several languages and had studied in Europe. The two appeared to be partners in both life and nation building. Latif often stood by Ataturk's side at public events without a veil, shocking traditionalists and delighting progressives. She spoke at rallies and championed women's rights as Turkey's first lady. However, the marriage was short-lived. Their personalities clashed under the intense pressure of Ataturk's work and scrutiny. Latif could be outspoken and fiercely independent, which led to arguments. After only 2.5 years, the couple divorced in August 1925. The breakup was officially amicable. Latif later compared it to Napoleon divorcing Josephine for the sake of the nation's future. But it caused Ataturk personal sadness. He never remarried. Instead, he often said metaphorically that he was wed to the Turkish nation. Indeed, throughout his 15-year presidency, Ataturk devoted himself wholly to governing and modernizing Turkey, at great cost to his personal life. Ataturk had no biological children, but he had a tender spot for children, and took several under his wing as adopted daughters and sons. He gave 8 young girls and 1 boy his surname, and raised them as his own. Perhaps the most famous of his adopted children is Sabiha Gökçen, whom Ataturk adopted as a teenage orphan in 1925. With his encouragement, Sabiha became the world's first female fighter pilot, earning fame as a daring aviator in the Turkish Air Force. Her groundbreaking career reflected Ataturk's belief in the potential of Turkish women, and he often held her up as an example of the new generation. At home, Ataturk was known to be warm and playful with his adopted kids. There are photos of him kneeling to play with them, or celebrating April 23rd Children's Day, a national holiday he dedicated to the youth. These softer moments reveal a nurturing side to a leader often seen as strict. In his personal habits, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk was very much a man of his era and upbringing. He loved culture and socializing. He enjoyed Western classical music as well as traditional Turkish folk songs. He was an avid reader of poetry and history, often staying up late into the night with a book. He also had a passion for dancing. He could waltz gracefully across a ballroom floor, surprising guests with his energy. Ataturk was frequently described as charming, witty, and even playful in small company. He would make jokes and had a hearty laugh. Yet he was also famously strong-willed, impatient with dissent, and could erupt in sudden anger if someone was, in his view, being foolish or obstinate. Ministers and officials who disagreed too harshly or performed poorly could face his sharp tongue or even be dismissed abruptly. He demanded discipline and efficiency from those around him, just as he did from himself. One aspect of Ataturk's life that weighed on him was a sense of loneliness. "There are two Mustafa Kemals," he once said. "One is the flesh and blood man. The other is you, the nation. And if one day my mortal self fades, I want the nation to continue my dreams." As the years went on, the flesh and blood man did feel the toll. He worked relentlessly, often sleeping only a few hours. Late at night, when Ankara's political business quieted, Ataturk would retreat to his study or balcony with a glass of his beloved rakı, Turkish anise liquor. There, in solitude, he would think, write in his journal, or converse with a few close friends. He was known to wrestle with doubts and memories in those midnight hours. A documentary by one of his associates later revealed glimpses of Ataturk pacing his empty palace halls in the dead of night, lost in thought. The weight of building a nation seemingly rested on his shoulders alone, and he felt it. Over time, his hard-driving lifestyle and heavy drinking began to damage his health. In the mid-1930s, Ataturk started showing symptoms of fatigue and illness, yet he ignored them for a while, pressing on with work and nationwide tours. Eventually, doctors diagnosed him with cirrhosis of the liver, a result of years of alcohol use. By 1938, his condition worsened. In the summer of 1938, Ataturk was gravely ill. He moved to the cool rooms of Dolmabahce Palace in Istanbul, overlooking the Bosphorus, hoping to recover, but it was not to be. On November 10, 1938, at 9:05 a.m., Mustafa Kemal Atatürk passed away, just 57 years old, by Western count, 58 by the Turkish calendar. The news of his death plunged the nation into profound grief. Factory sirens wailed, traffic halted, and people across Turkey stood in silence at that exact minute, a tradition of remembrance that continues to this day every November 10th at 9:05 a.m. Ataturk's body lay in state, draped in the red Turkish flag, as hundreds of thousands of sobbing citizens filed past to pay respects. Foreign dignitaries, including adversaries from World War I, sent tributes to the fallen leader. One American newspaper in 1938 called him Turkey's George Washington, encapsulating his role as father of the nation. Ataturk's passing marked the end of an era, but the birth of a lasting legacy. Modern Turkey was his monument. In 1953, his remains were moved to a grand mausoleum in Ankara called Anıtkabir, where they rest today. Ataturk's face and name are omnipresent in Turkey. His portrait hangs in government offices, schools, and private homes, often gazing sternly yet kindly, a reminder of who gave the Turks their independent republic. Almost every town has a statue or street named after him. By law, insulting his memory is a crime, reflecting the quasi-sacred respect he commands. For most Turks, he is Ata, father. Every year on national holidays, especially Republic Day, October 29th, and Youth and Sports Day, May 19th, the anniversary of his landing at Samsun, millions commemorate Ataturk with ceremonies, songs, and gratitude. They remember how he led them from occupation to independence, and then forged a new nation on principles of science, secularism, and progress. As time passes, Ataturk's life has taken on an almost legendary aura, yet he is also remembered as human, a man of extraordinary vision, who nonetheless had personal flaws and struggles. In recent years, some documentaries and books have tried to portray Ataturk more the man behind the myth, noting his moments of doubt, loneliness, or his love of the simple joys of life. Far from diminishing him, these human details make his achievements all the more remarkable. Despite burdens and imperfections, he achieved feats few thought possible. Beyond Turkey, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk's impact has been felt worldwide. He was arguably one of the greatest nation builders of the 20th century. Leaders of other countries admired and drew inspiration from him. For instance, Iran's modernizing Shah Reza Pahlavi and Afghanistan's King Amanullah Khan both attempted similar secular and educational reforms in their nations, inspired by Ataturk's example, though with mixed results. Reformers across the Muslim world cited Ataturk to argue that Islamic societies could embrace modern values without losing their identity. Statesmen and historians from east to west have heaped praise on Ataturk. U.S. General Douglas MacArthur called him one of the greatest leaders of our era, who gave his people pride and self-confidence. In 1963, on the 25th anniversary of Ataturk's death, President John F. Kennedy paid tribute. The name of Ataturk reminds mankind of the historical accomplishments of one of the greatest men of this century. His leadership gave inspiration to the Turkish nation, and his foresight and courage have given Turkey her rightful place among the nations of the world. Even Winston Churchill, no stranger to great leaders, wrote in 1938 that Ataturk's death was a loss not only for Turkey but for Europe, recognizing how Ataturk revived a nation and brought it into the modern world. Perhaps one of the most touching tributes came from Greece, Turkey's former enemy. In 1934, Greek Prime Minister Eleftherios Venizelos nominated Ataturk for the Nobel Peace Prize, acknowledging that the peace and friendship which blossomed between Turkey and Greece after their bitter war was due in large part to Ataturk's forward-looking statesmanship. In the end, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk's life was like a dramatic film with soaring highs and crushing lows, an emotional arc that saw a once downtrodden soldier become a revolutionary savior, then an enlightened lawgiver, and finally an aging father of a nation pondering his legacy. It's a story of transformation, of a person, of a people, of an ideal. Ataturk took a collapsed empire and, through sheer determination and love for his nation, built a new Turkey on the principles of freedom and modernity. Today, in Turkey's schools, children learn to recite Ataturk's inspirational words to the youth, urging them to protect and continue the work he began. His portrait looks down on them, not just as an icon, but as a challenge to keep Turkey moving forward. Ne mutlu Türk'üm diyene, he said. Happy is the one who calls himself a Turk. The enduring task he left is to live up to that pride through unity, progress, and peace. And so, every year, when the moment of 9:05 a.m. on November 10th arrives, Turkey falls silent. Cars stop, people stand, and in that silence is a collective thank you to Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, the man whose life story became the story of modern Turkey.